Well, hello everyone, and welcome once again to another episode of the 360 Experience podcast. And today's conversation with one of the top health and wellness nutritionists, personal trainers, authors, biohackers, longevity experts. I mean, it's a long list of things when you describe Ben Greenfield. I'm so honored to be able to have him on today's show. Ben Greenfield has been ranked as the #1 personal trainer in the United States. He's a 13-time Ironman triathlete. He is an absolute encyclopedia on the subject matter of longevity and health and wellness. And today we're going to talk about a wide variety of topics that range from the subject matter of diet to what is the proper exercise routine, how much is too much, what's the sweet spot for overall longevity, health, and wellness? What is healthy eating at the end of the day? How important is sleep in the equation, and how to ensure that you get proper rest? How to enhance your memory as you get older. This is sure to be full of a lot of info. I want to forewarn you in advance. Like I said, Ben is an encyclopedia. He's going to rattle off a ton of information. You probably want to take some notes as you go. And implement some of these things, but we're also going to direct you to his website. He has his own podcast. He has a tremendous number of resources. And I think that you're going to really enjoy our conversation together. I've gotten to know Ben over the last year or so, and we've spent some time together in a few foreign countries with our wives and had a great time together. And we'll infuse some of that into the dialogue as well. Before we get to my conversation with Ben Greenfield, as always, I want to say thank you for subscribing to the 360 Experience podcast and for listening. And if you're not a subscriber, please take a moment to subscribe to, whatever your favorite channel is that you're listening to this on: Spotify, Apple, Google. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please make sure that you also forward this along to anybody you think would benefit from it in your life, that would benefit from a conversation around longevity, health, and wellness. As I've mentioned many times before, the more likes, the more comments, the more subscribers, the greater the opportunity there is for me to get people such as Ben Greenfield, who is a notorious expert on the subject matter of a topic that is so important to all of us, which is health and wellness. So without further ado, my conversation with Ben Greenfield. Of course you're on a treadmill, man. That's where I'd expect to find you. Doing a little workout while we're doing our podcast together. It's good to see.
Yeah, I'll do my dumbbell curls later on. It's one of those like whisper hyper soft treadmills though. It's kind of cool. It's like I don't know. I've never seen anything like it. It's got these little like soft, cushiony pads, and so it's really nice for work because you can work and do podcasts and stuff like this, and it's not like a loud hum. But it's really interesting. Apparently, like they made this treadmill. It's called a Walk-olution treadmill to strengthen the feet and also like to not have a lot of hip and knee impact during a day of work. So, dude, I'm like addicted to it. I got it, I think like 4 months ago, and I'm probably walking like 10,000 steps a day while I'm working now.
Wow, that's cool. And you got your mic hanging there. And I mean, do you have something that's like to be able to like check email or anything like that? Or is it just the mic? Well, you obviously have a monitor.
So I got a standing desk, and the treadmill's in front of the standing desk, but I don't know if you can see this little bar here in front of me. It came with like a laptop stand that goes on the bar, so I can have my laptop close to me. But I don't really like to write. I do a lot of dictation, a lot of consults, a lot of calls, and some podcasts while I'm on the treadmill. And I've never felt like I can like creatively write that well while I'm walking. Although there is a little pad behind me that I can lean on to stand and write. And I've always wondered if it's just me. And then I saw a study that someone forwarded to me pretty recently, it was about 2.5 weeks ago, that shows that the type of cognitive patterns associated with things like creative writing and sometimes analytical thinking are best triggered in a seated, not a standing state, which is kind of interesting because I always feel like I can write better stuff when I'm like sitting on an airplane or, sitting at the table or whatever. And even though maybe metabolically it's not as great, it turns out that cognitively, if you just want to write, sitting is a pretty good posture for it.
It's interesting. Like for me, I'm not much of a writer, but I'm definitely a dictator and I'm definitely a creative thinker. And I find that if I'm in movement, my creativity gets unlocked. So, but I think that that's a bit of a different cognitive experience from writing. So you actually led me into what I wanted to start with. I want to get into diet and health and wellness and longevity and personal development stuff and all the cool things that you and I love to talk about. But let's just start right out of the gate with working out. Like, I mean, you're on your treadmill right now. Got a buddy named Tyler Osby who 75% of the time that I talk to him on a Zoom call, he's walking on his treadmill. I know also that, you know, as a former like hardcore triathlete, went through Navy SEAL training, all these types of things, you've kind of scaled back some of your workout routine and made it a little bit more mellow, I think would be the right word, but you could definitely say. And what I really want is right out of the gate for you to share with the viewer, you know, what are some things to consider when it comes to working out as it relates to longevity, and what are some of the best workout routines in your opinion?
Oh man, I love that question. You're right. I used to be a lot more masochistic. I think maybe part of it was identity, and you know, we could get into this. You could probably get pretty esoteric, but I think that a lot of times people who are off doing like massive numbers of Spartan races and Ironman triathlons and marathons and open water swim competitions and, you know, CrossFit competitions, all the type of stuff that I was doing, they're typically either, you know, looking for their identity to a certain extent. Sometimes I think that if we had woven into society something like more remarkable ceremonial rites of passage for our youth, we might, you know, find less 20-year-olds trying to do, you know, triathlons and bodybuilding and whatnot to prove themselves. And then I also think that there is a little bit of a healthy escapism, especially with some of the chronic repetitive motion type of sports. You tend to see a lot of folks who are like former alcoholics or drug abusers will be drawn to those type of events because they can kind of trigger a lot of those same dopaminergic pathways, but obviously with a little less potential for damage or death or, you know, or self-harm. Now that being said, there's definitely not a risk-free aspect of hard exercise. There's a researcher named James O'Keefe, and he's one of the first physicians and researchers, because I forget if he's a PhD or an MD. It's not important, but he found that there was a law of diminishing returns with exercise when it comes to cardiovascular risk and what's called arterial stiffness. And it appears that once you exceed about 180 minutes, which is about 3 hours of moderate to hard exercise, we're talking something beyond like playing pickleball and walking or whatever. We're talking like, you know, hard bike rides, hard swims, hard runs, CrossFit sessions, weight training sessions, you know, high intensity interval training. Once you exceed about 3 hours, there's actually a pretty significant law of diminishing returns in terms of arterial stiffness and potential damage to the heart, particularly related to plaque buildup or calcium buildup in the heart. And I'll tell you in a second why that's important. But there's probably a few people listening to him who are like 3 hours. Like that sounds like a hell week. I would never get close to that. But I actually know a lot of people who are hitting the gym more than 3 times a week. And when they're at the gym, they're there for more than an hour. And some of those people would actually fall into the category of people who are doing too much. And then definitely like the average Ironman triathlete, which I was, or marathoner, or, you know, obstacle course racer, or bodybuilder, or CrossFitter, they're definitely in excess of that. So even though I think that something like joint discomfort, soreness, maybe loss of time spent with family or friends, or engaged in social events or work events, etc., are all side effects of excessive exercise, it looks like the heart is the organ that really takes the biggest hit. With secondarily, you could argue that you'll tend to see low testosterone, especially in men who exercise too much. You'll tend to see thyroid deficits. That's more often in women who exercise too much, but the heart's the biggest. So I actually went in for a heart screening way back in the day. This was probably like 7 years ago, when I was like a super, you know, quote, healthy, fit Ironman triathlete. And even though my cardiovascular performance numbers, like my resting heart rate and my EKG and everything, were fantastic, I actually tested with pretty high levels of calcium in my heart via what's called a calcium scan score. And that's concerning because even though in exercising athletes or individuals who are fit, the calcium is a little less prone to break off and wind up in the bloodstream, cause a stroke, heart attack, etc., it's still plaque, it's still calcium deposition, and it's still concerning. I also tested with a great deal of what's called a left ventricular wall thickness, which is kind of like an athlete's heart, and that causes the heart to need to work a little bit harder. And when you step back and look at that, the main reason is that you're inflaming and overworking an organ more than it perhaps has been adapted to from an ancestral or evolutionary standpoint, right? It's not as though our primal hunter-gatherer ancestors were like sedentary. They were walking, farming, gathering, hunting, etc. But I mean, even if you go hunting for 7 days, Tim, you're kind of like walking at a slow pace, occasionally lifting heavy stuff, stepping over logs. It's not like you're running, like an Ironman triathlon, for hours upon hours a day. It's kind of like low level physical activity, the same as you'd see in someone who's like a modern day gardener or construction worker or someone who mows lawns for a living. It's a little bit different when we talk about low level physical activity all day long versus crushing yourself with like a CrossFit workout in the morning and a high intensity interval training session in the afternoon or whatever. So ultimately, the heart doesn't seem to be able to hold up too well under those conditions. And so this is important, I think, for a lot of people to know, because most of the time for your doctor to check and see if you have a healthy heart, they'll do a lipid panel, right? They'll test your cholesterol and your triglycerides and maybe some inflammatory markers and your HDL. And they might even like put you on a treadmill and do like one of those stress tests. But it's shocking the number of healthy, fit people who suffer from cardiovascular disease or even will like have a heart attack during exercise or at an unexpected time. And the reason for that is because of that calcium buildup, that plaque deposition in the heart, which a lipid screen really can't tell you that much about. And neither could like an EKG on a treadmill. You actually have to go in for what's called a calcium scan score. And there's a newer version of a calcium scan score called a Clearly scan. And I think anybody who can get their doctor to order it for them who is above the age of 40 should think about getting this scan. It's spelled with 2 E's, Clearly. And it's an AI-based diagnostic imaging of the heart. Same thing as a calcium scan. It's a CT radiographic scan, but it gives you like a full 3D analysis of the entire heart and where any plaque might be deposited, calcium, whether it's stable, whether it's unstable, etc. And you can have like a perfect lipid score, like perfect cholesterol, and have plaque and calcium that is, the type of thing that some people will even call like a widow maker, right? Where someone just unexpectedly drops out of a heart attack. And it's because a lot of people, including athletes, and fit people, don't realize that they have that in their heart. And it's not as though you can't do something about it. There are modern medications. One's called a PCSK9 inhibitor, and that can even be as seldom as twice a year injection that can like melt away this plaque. In some people who are statin responders, like a low dose statin can help out, even though it's shocking the number of people who are taking a statin and haven't tested their genetics and don't even realize, like, I'm not a statin responder. Like, I can take a statin, it's not gonna do anything for me because I genetically am a statin non-responder. And then there's natural things like red yeast rice extract or pomegranate juice or niacin or a number of different so-called artery scrubbing type of flavonoids and polyphenols from the vegetable and fruit kingdom that can also help out in this scenario. So kind of a long answer to the first part of your question, but that's, in my opinion, the main reason that people should be careful with excessive exercise. Yeah, there's some hormone issues. Yeah, there's the fact that many studies have shown that most people can get fit in a much, much shorter period of time than they think. Yeah, there's some of the time and social issues, but most of the time, I think the heart is the main thing that you want to be concerned about. And I'll pause there before I get to the second part of your question about what a good program for longevity would be. But does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Well, you have no idea how much it makes sense. I want to share a little bit of a backstory of my own that will just totally line up. So, been an athlete my whole life. I've worked out my whole life. Consider myself to eat healthy, be fit, all these types of things. About, I don't know, maybe a decade, maybe a little more than a decade ago now, 15 years ago, my doctor, who's a super proactive doctor, says to me, "Hey, I want to, you're at the age now where I want to do an ultrasound on your arteries, on your main arteries, make sure that they're all clear." So carotid arteries in my neck are totally fine. Gets to the backs of my knees. Those arteries have a little bit of plaque buildup, but nothing out of the norm. Left femoral artery is fine. Right femoral artery has a 35% blockage. And he's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, this is like a big deal here." He goes, "Because I have to assume that if you've got 35% blockage in your right femoral artery, that you could have plaque in your heart arteries." So he wants me immediately to go on a statin and also suggest red yeast rice as an alternative to the medical, the synthetic statin. So long story short is I'm a little bit resistant to going on the statin. I go to a nutritionist. Nutritionist then puts me on a totally different diet. And the diet that he puts me on actually has me consuming more fat in some cases, but completely reducing sugar and modifying the intensity of my workouts. And what he explained to me and what I did from my own research, which is what you're describing, is that you can actually damage the interior lining of your arteries by having excessive workouts and or by an excessive amount of sugar content. So I go on a 30-day, very low sugar diet, actually convert from non-fat milk to like half and half, which is super counterintuitive because I'm wondering like, why would I be taking in more fat if I've got blockage, right? He explains to me the blockage is likely from sugar content and working out. This seems like an isolated incident. It's just in one artery or body. Come back 30 days later, we run a lipid panel. My cholesterol, to your point, wasn't that high in the first place. I mean, my overall was like 185. I come back in, my overall is like 140. My LDL is like 92. And my doctor goes,
even though you're eating more fat, your cholesterol drops. It's counterintuitive for a lot of people who don't realize like blood cholesterol levels in no way really mimic, at least to a very great extent, what dietary cholesterol intake is.
Correct. So my doctor says to me, "Did you start taking the statin without me knowing about it?" I'm like, "No, haven't taken anything." I told him what I did. So we've been monitoring every year for the last decade or whatever. It's frozen at that 35% blockage. Hasn't gotten any worse, hasn't gotten any better, which led him to conclude that, oh, by the way, then he has me go in and do a CT scan. I got a calcium score of 0. A couple years later, he has me go the next step and do one with contrast. Okay, and that just puts the contrast through all your arteries in your heart. They can, the radiologist can see. He goes like, "Look, you got no plaque buildup in your heart, thank God." So I'm super clean there. So this is like an isolated incident in my femoral artery and is likely due to the fact that I used to be a runner for a long time. I ran cross country, I've run half marathons, all that. And I probably had like some kind of an injury there that resulted in this plaque buildup in this one area of my arteries. But it's really fascinating that you brought this up to start our conversation because I can autobiographically relate to that very much.
I didn't know that about your history, but that makes a lot of sense now. And you know what you say about sugar, I think is important for people to know, because even though like I would say that I'm more concerned about high levels of what are called linoleic acid from vegetable oils because they get stored in your body for sometimes up to 3 months. Whereas sugar, you can kind of like burn off if you're physically active, and it's a little bit less of a component that comprises your cell membranes, like something like canola oil or sunflower oil or safflower oil would be. I think the main thing that you got to be cautious with about sugar is what you were alluding to, the fact that we're often told a low-fat diet is the best diet to manage heart disease or balance cholesterol, when in fact, a lot of people hear that, and what replaces the fat are sugars and starches, which can be inflammatory in the vasculature, which can cause basically what's called glycation, which is almost like sticky proteins that can adhere to cell walls. And also the up and down fluctuation of the glucose during the day can lead to a little bit of pancreatic instability, insulin insensitivity. And so, the answer is not necessarily to eat a low-fat diet because the fats get replaced with sugars and starches. I think it's to eat a diet high in natural fats, omega-3 fatty acids, fish oil, almost like a Mediterranean version of a low carbohydrate diet. Because there's some people who will hear what you said, Tim. You've probably come across folks like this who are kind of like dirty keto. It's like, eat a McDonald's and I take the bun off and I put like half a cup of creamer in my coffee every morning, and I eat peanut butter out of the peanut butter jar at night, and those people aren't doing themselves any favors either. So I tell people, yeah, eat a diet rich in vegetables and, sugar stable fruits like blueberries and things like that. Eat the rainbow, a lot of herbs, a lot of plants, a lot of spices. And then, yeah, like big fatty cuts of salmon and, dosing with fish oil and even sometimes the fatty parts of a steak or a pork chop, if it's from a good natural source, olives, avocados. Yeah, the whole like
popsicles
is pretty outdated.
Popsicles in Mexico, right?
Coconut milk popsicles in Mexico.
Yeah.
First time I met Tim, I think you were shocked because I was the healthy nutritionist guy. I took you out for a chocolate covered popsicle.
Yes, I shocked. I was stunned. I was stunned because you ate 2 of them in one night, I believe. So.
yeah. I think I ate 3 of them one day. So yeah, that's interesting that they have that history with the heart. But I'm sure a lot of people wonder, well, what do you do then? If you're not supposed to do all the hard exercise, but you are supposed to exercise, obviously. I don't know if we've talked about this before, Tim, but my background is exercise physiology. So University of Idaho, my degree was in exercise physiology and biomechanics with an emphasis in human nutrition and pharmacology. And the reason that's important is because a physiologist kind of looks at the different metabolic pathways in the human body. And in the same way that a strength and conditioning coach might say, okay, well, I'm looking at the game of football and here are the needs, right? Strength, power, a certain amount of explosiveness over a distance of anywhere from, 10 to 40 yards, some type of shoulder stability. And then depending on the position, maybe good shoulder rotation for a quarterback or, good horizontal extension for a linebacker, et cetera. When a physiologist looks at the human body, particularly from a longevity standpoint, I step back and say, what are the different metabolic pathways that one would need to maintain a certain amount of proficiency or optimization in order to function well late into life? And once you step back and look at things that way, it's pretty easy to actually decide what you're going to prioritize for any given week or month in an exercise program. So I would chunk it into a few categories. The first would be strength. Like we know that grip strength, the amount of functional muscle, staving off sarcopenia or the loss of muscle with age, and general functional muscle fiber percentage is associated with decreased all-cause risk of mortality, even more so than like VO2 max or cardiovascular fitness, even though that's important. And I think the reason for that is because it staves off a lot of the frailty that occurs with age. A lot of older people lose their fitness because of injuries, not because they quit going to the gym, but they get injured stepping off a curb, or they get injured, playing soccer, or they get injured, swinging the golf club, and they miss a few days and then a few weeks and a few months of working out, and that accumulates as you age. And a properly structured strength training program is, I think, the best way to keep that at bay. Now, as you alluded to, I used to do a lot of competitive sports. I used to be very into like explosive type of weight training, CrossFit type of exercises, snatches and cleans and jerks, and even like a bodybuilding style approach with very high reps and a lot of sets. I'm now convinced that the very, very best way to maintain strength and muscle long into old age with a very low risk of injury is not that style of training, even though that style of training is good if you're going to be playing sports, and every once in a while you may want to throw in some kettlebell swings or clap push-ups or box jumps or those type of things. But because they have a high risk of injury, which again, if you get injured and you've missed a few days and that accumulates as you age, that can be problematic. Super slow training, very slow controlled lifting done 2 to 3 times per week, I think is one of the best ways to stay strong and maintain muscle with age. And that's like probably about 80 to 90% of what I do now for strength training. What I mean by that is I'll go to the gym, whether it's my home gym or a health club or whatever, and it's one single set to failure for each exercise. So super slow chest press or push up, super slow deadlifts, super slow pull down or pull up, super slow overhead press, super slow row, and super slow squat. That would be an example of like a cluster of
just
multi-joint
one set
exercises that I do.
You're saying just one set?
Just one set. Yeah, I'll warm up on, like an Airdyne bike or an elliptical train or whatever, but one set to failure. And that's important. So we're talking like, people might be watching the video, like the cadence of a chest press might be 1, 2, 3. And you're just pushing for almost like 20 seconds out to an extended position. And then you come back very, 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 very slow. And there's a emergency room physician who wrote a book called Body by Science, which is where I first discovered this concept. His name is Dr. Doug McGuff. And he gets into a lot of the science of it in his book. But because you're moving the muscle very slow, you're recruiting both fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers. You're building up a lot of blood flow resistance in the peripheral muscles, which has a cardiovascular training effect. And you can get very strong and maintain muscle. And this is important for busy guys like us as a time hack in a very short period of time. So you can do super slow full body lifting for about 20 to 30 minutes, 2 or 3 times a week. And that would satisfy a lot of your strength training.
So
that being said,
let me ask you a couple questions.
We'll stay physically active, but go ahead.
So it's one set, but what is the amount of weight relative to what you would normally do? And is it just one rep, or is it as many reps as you can do until you get to failure?
Great question. Subtle nuance. Time under tension. Usually you need about 2 minutes of time under tension for the muscle. So unless you were lifting a weight that took you like 60 seconds to go up and 60 seconds to go down, which is just like mentally hard to do. And for most people, it's going to be somewhere in the range of 5 to 8 repetitions for one single set to failure, moving the weight at anywhere from, 10 to 30 seconds up and 10 to 30 seconds down. So that's kind of the overview of that training. And then in people who still want some like the explosive quick muscle, like I focus on that stuff when I'm not in the gym. Like I keep a kettlebell on the floor of my office and I'll do kettlebell swings every once in a while when I step over that, or, I'll drop and do some push-ups, multiple intervals throughout the day, do some air squats, occasionally go to the mailbox and then run back. So I don't do a lot of like the explosive fast type of stuff or bodybuilding stuff at the gym. I'm just like super duper slow, heavy strength training. And so that would kind of check the box of strength or muscle. And I think it would be top of the totem pole would be single set resistance training to failure at a super slow pace.
3 times a week for roughly 30 minutes. It's interesting. Yeah. I just got done. I don't know if you've checked this out. It's not a spectacular documentary, but it was still enjoyable for me to watch. There's a new doc on Netflix, 4-part series called Living to 100. And it's done by the guy that kind of wrote the seminal book on the blue zones 20 years ago.
Oh yeah, Dan Buettner.
Exactly. I'm sure you probably know him. You know everybody in the space. Andrew Huberman and all kinds of people. So Dan did a nice job. And one of the things that like I've always been intrigued by with the blue zones is just the fact that it's that the common denominator is this non-aggressive, consistent movement, right? Like the people in Sardinia that live in that hilly village and that are constantly walking uphill. It kind of lines up a little bit with what you're saying as it relates to kind of pulling back a little bit on the intensity, doesn't it?
Yeah. We have inherited a lot of our knowledge of strength training from like the 80s and 90s bodybuilding movement. That was championed by folks like, Arnold Schwarzenegger, even going farther back than that, guys like Charles Atlas. And these guys would spend a lot of time in the gym and get very large muscles, which I don't even think are something that are as popular nowadays as they were, back in the days of giant ripped, bodybuilding male and female models on the magazine covers. And, those of us who grew up in the era of like, freaking Rocky Balboa as a boxer looking like a giant bodybuilder. And, this idea of more muscle is better and you don't want to get sand kicked in your face at the beach or whatever. Like we kind of grew up in that era. And not only is that type of muscle like really, really hard to build unless you have a ton of time at the gym, but bodybuilders don't necessarily have long lives. Like that muscle takes a lot of energy to carry and cool and produces a great deal of oxidative stress in the body. And so, I think the cool thing about the super slow training or the single set to failure training is you're just building really strong muscle that generates a lot of force per pound, but you're not necessarily putting on a ton of mass. Like, I mean, you can see me, I'm not like built like Arnold or anything, but I'm probably stronger than I've ever been in my life using that type of approach. Like, I've started to do a lot more rolling in jiu-jitsu, and that's one comment people tell me. They're like, dude, your hands and your arms are so freaking strong. It's unbelievable. And almost all I do again is just that super slow training for weight training. So I think there's something to it. There are other things that you wouldn't want to neglect, though, other pathways back to the concept of exercise physiology and the way I might see the body. Another one that's very correlated with longevity, back to the root of your question, is VO2 max, maximum oxygen utilization. And that's just basically the amount of oxygen you can breathe in, pass through the bloodstream, and have taken up by your muscles. There's been a lot of studies that have looked into the very, very best way to keep VO2 max elevated if we were talking about the minimum effective dose of exercise. And all you have to do is once every 1 to 2 weeks. This is probably like the hardest thing I do in my entire fitness program, but once every 1 to 2 weeks, you want to do a 4 to 6 minute maximum sustainable pace effort at a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio, meaning you're also recovering for 4 to 6 minutes, 4 to 6 times. So that's like a 30 to 45 minute cardiovascular training session. And a lot of triathletes and marathons, that's the type of thing they're doing like every day. But once every 1 to 2 weeks, if you can go kind of empty the gas tank, 4 to 6 efforts, 4 to 6 minutes in duration, with a 4 to 6 minute recovery between each, you can keep your VO2 max elevated late into life. And like I'll make this fun sometimes. Like I'll load up a Spotify soundtrack with 5 5-minute hard songs and 5 5-minute easy songs. And I'll just listen to the track while I'm on the Aerodyne. Every time the hard songs come on, you go hard. Every time the easy songs come on, you go easy. I mean,
so when you're on the machine that you're on right now, is what you're saying.
Oh, if I were on this treadmill, yeah. I mean, technically I could run on this and I could run for 5 minutes and then walk. But I like, for that type of stuff, I like non-weight bearing. Like I like the pool or the rowing machine or the elliptical trainer or a bicycle. I'm kind of over my days of hard running. I think it just beat up my knees and my hips a lot. Yeah, you can do it running. So
me too.
Yeah, that's VO2 max. And
what about things like stairs? Like there's these incredible stairs in my neighborhood in Costa Rica that I love to do, and they're a beast, man. 4,400 steps. Climbing stairs in that interval training that you're talking about. Would that be a way to get that in as well?
If you've got access to like a stair well or staircase that takes you 4 to 6 minutes to climb, yeah. But there's 2 other pathways I wanted to mention that might be more fitting for stairs that you don't hit with what I just described. One is your ability to be able to buffer lactic acid. Another guy in the longevity space, Dr. Peter Attia, is very into this concept of lactate buffering. I remember back in the day, he and I used to speak at a lot of these same health events, and we were always comparing our blood lactate numbers because we both had these little blood lactate meters what we could measure when we were on the bike and see how much lactic acid was being produced during exercise. And it turns out that being able to buffer that lactic acid is an important fitness parameter. And the way that you train your body to be able to do that is you have to build up more lactic acid than you're removing. Now, what I just described to you, like exercising for 4 to 6 minutes and then recovering for 4 to 6 minutes, that's way too long a period of time of a recovery to train your lactic acid system, because most of that lactic acid is kind of like out of the muscle by the time that 4 to 6 minutes of recovery is over. But there are other exercise modalities, and these you would typically do about 1 or 2 times a week that will build up lactic acid tolerance. I'll admit that strength training will do this to a certain extent, but I'll throw in a couple of these as well. I think the best example is based on research done in Japan. They're called Tabata sets, T-A-B-A-T-A. And you could even use these as a warm-up or as a finisher to one of those weight training protocols that I talked about. Because I'm all about time hacking, getting as much of this done, within your exercise space as possible. So a Tabata set's very simple. It's 4 minutes long, so it's not that long, of 20 seconds hard, 10 seconds easy, 20 seconds hard, 10 seconds easy. It's basically 8 times through. The reason that's important is the 20 seconds hard builds up a bunch of lactate. The 10 seconds isn't long enough to allow it to be removed. So by the time you're done with this set, you have a lot of lactic acid in the tissue, and that doesn't have to be done that often. We're talking like, twice a week, for example, on a Monday and a Friday, you could do your 4-minute Tabata set, and that's how you hit the lactate threshold.
And that could be like sprinting, riding the bike fast, anything like that.
Yeah. I like to do it on the Airdyne because it literally has like a belt, at least mine does. There's a button that says 2010 on it, and I can just like push it and
What's an
automatically
Airdyne?
monitor it for me.
What's an Airdyne? I'm not familiar
It's
with
that bike with both the arms and the legs.
Ah, got it.
You know, like you pedal and your arms are moving as well.
Got it.
Yeah. So that's your lactate threshold. There's a few other parameters as well. One is your mitochondria. You know, you've probably heard those described as the powerhouses of the cell that produce ATP. The best way to build up a high amount of mitochondrial density is by doing very short efforts with very long recovery periods. So this would be, for example, you know, classic mitochondrial training set. And I do something like this once a week, is a very hard 20 to 30 second effort with a luxurious rest period. So this would be like 30 seconds hard, 4 minutes easy, 4 times through. You know, you can do the bike, you do the treadmill, you do the rowing machine, whatever. And when I'm saying all these little things, it might seem like a lot to people, but once you start to add it up in your head, you're like, wait, okay, so I'm doing strength training 3 times a week for 20 or 30 minutes. I'm preceding a couple of those sessions with the Tabata set. Maybe I'm preceding another one of those sessions with this 4 sets of 30 seconds hard with long, luxurious recoveries, and then throwing in a VO2 max set on a Saturday or whatever, right? So you want to make sure that you train those 3 parameters, though, for cardiovascular fitness: your VO2 max, your lactate threshold, and your mitochondria. We've already talked about the strength training. You got that taken care of. And then there's just basically, I would say, 2 other things to keep track of. One would be your fat burning capacity. And for that, I'm a big fan of once a week, some type of a fasted, long, slow cardio session. For me, typically it's playing frisbee golf or hiking or going on a bike ride with my kids on the weekend, where you're just like rolling out of bed and, you know, whatever, riding for 90 minutes down to downtown to go get some waffles, or, you know, going on an early morning hike without a lot of fuel. And the reason I say fasted is because if you aren't eating a bunch before or during, you're forcing your body to tap into its own fat stores. And again, a lot of people overdo that. They do way too much long fasted cardio sessions. But once a week, doing something that's kind of like extended period of time, like an hour and a half or more, slow pace, without a lot of food on board, is a good way to keep yourself trained to be like a fat burning machine, for example. And again, for me, that's typically like a Saturday or Sunday, just a longer weekend hike or bike ride or anything where, you know, I'm kind of up in the morning, fasted, and going out for a longer period of time. And so that would be another parameter. And then the final is just what I call young muscle mobility. You hear about foam rolling. You hear about great physical therapists like Kelly Starrett, who wrote what I consider to be the Bible of mobility, called Becoming a Supple Leopard. You hear about like these vibrating foam rollers and peanut-shaped foam rollers, little balls that you can put on different parts of the body, and massage guns. So that all gets rid of a lot of these adhesions that occur between muscle fibers, introduces more blood flow into muscle and out of muscle, allows for better lymph flow. And some people like to do this before or after workout. The way I do it, Tim, is I carve out 10 to 15 minutes every morning. If you do the math, that means like by the time the end of the week is over, I've got like 70 minutes of mobility work amassed by just doing this every morning. I wake up, I have my big glass of water, I go downstairs to my basement, and I just basically do foam rolling, mobility ball work, some stretches, find anything that's tight and hitting it with the massage gun. And I literally set my watch. I say, okay, this is 15 minutes of my self-care time before I go into the rest of the day. And that's really important to stay injury-free. So that's every morning for just 10 to 15 minutes. You know, I got the foam rollers, the balls, the massage gun, and I just kind of like do my own massage therapy on myself. And I still get a massage like 1 or 2 times a month. But man, I think a lot of people get injured or sore or stiff, especially as they age, because they don't realize the benefits of this deep tissue mobility work. And so stepping back, you got strength, VO2 max, lactate threshold, mitochondria, fat burning, and mobility. If you hit all that stuff and you're hitting something like that every week, that, as a long response to your question, is kind of like how I'd exercise for longevity.
What are the common denominators of top originators in the mortgage business? They're well scripted. They have a system for marketing themselves that generates leads. They manage an effective database, and they have strong referral partner relationships. The other common denominator of many great originators is that they have a business and life plan a roadmap, a guide for them to achieve success. And they have an ally, a coach, who assists them in the successful implementation of that plan. Performance Experts Performance Accelerator private one-on-one 1-year coaching program is now accepting applications. This is my company, and these are my certified coaches that specialize in the mortgage business. Go to www.mortgagecoachingnow.com and click on Get a Coach, or go to the show notes and click on the link that's provided in this episode. Now let's get back to the show. I want to ask you still about like some healthy snacks in a second, but something popped into my mind while I was listening to you. And I remember this when we were in Mexico together, and we had our time and I was interviewing you, and I had several of my clients come up to me and say, my goodness, like what a memory that guy has. I mean, you have an astonishing memory. Like you're like an encyclopedia of facts and authors and different, hacks and all these types of things. What do you do to sustain and maybe even improve your memory over time? Because you must be doing something, because it's truly a superpower of yours.
Yeah, well, I've got you fooled because you obviously haven't asked me any questions about like world history or cryptocurrency yet. There are certain sectors in which I can operate a little bit more seamlessly from a cognitive standpoint. And I think that leads to the blaringly obvious question is like, if you're really passionate about what you do and you got your nose down in it every day, you're basically engaged in spaced repetition every single day of the type of information that you're then going out and teaching to other people, which we also know is one of the best forms of learning. So first for me is just consistency. Like I'm a lifelong learner, super curious. I read a minimum of 2 chapters of a book a day. Usually I'm close to 3 or 4 books per week. I have books, on my nightstand, in my office, on my Kindle, loaded up on Audible. So I have a constant stream of information, and much of that information is relevant to the sector in which I operate: longevity, fitness, health, nutrition, etc. So there's a great deal of spaced repetition that occurs. The second is that I think that this is obviously not going to come as a surprise to you, Tim, and to many of your listeners or viewers, but sleep is very important. And I think a lot of people just don't even realize that they're living a zombie lifestyle based on poor sleep patterns, absence of natural light in the morning, presence of too much light in the evening, bedroom's not cold enough, the bedroom's noisy because you're not using something to drown out noise, you have business and the TV in the bedroom, so you're distracted there, and you just have poor sleep habits. And I'm very protective of my sleep. I don't sleep a lot. I usually sleep about 6 or 7 hours a night. And then because I don't sleep that recommended 7 to 9 hours, I also take a 20 to 45 minute afternoon siesta after lunch. And I think that because sleep is when emotional processing takes place, whereas detoxification and removal of lymph from the brain takes place, and it allows for better alertness and cognition later on in the day. I think sleep is another. And then I think the last I would say is a little bit biochemical. I think that there are certain things that you can consume to improve memory and certain things you can avoid to keep the brain from getting a little bit sluggish. The latter is pretty simple, right? Excess alcohol. I'll drink 3 or 4 times a week. That's like a glass of wine or a really, really nice liquor, digestif for bitter over soda water. I can't even remember the last time I was drunk. It was probably like, 13 or 14 years ago. So I rarely drink to excess. I don't swear off alcohol, but I'm very, very careful with alcohol because of the toxic effects of acetaldehyde on neural tissue. I'm also extremely careful with THC. I am a fan of some other elements of cannabis like CBN or CBG or CBD, but there is no doubt that although it's great for things like creativity or sex, that THC definitely strips your memory off and takes some lifespan off of your brain. So that's another one that I would be super careful with. And then vegetable oils would be another, which I already mentioned. Those can be a little bit inflammatory for neural tissue. And then certain things that you can consume, and I'm pretty big on this. I eat somewhat low carb, so my brain has a steady source of ketones, which are naturally produced by the body when you burn fats. And those are a very stable fuel for the brain, also for the heart and the liver and the diaphragm. So I'm very careful about sugar and starches, as you are, not just for the cardiovascular reasons, but for the mental benefits. I typically on most days will have something that allows for better neuroplasticity or neurogenesis or memory or cognition or executive function or all 5, like lion's mane extract that I'll put into my coffee, or there are even certain supplements I'll use like There's everything from Onnit has one called Alpha Brain. The company Qualia has one called Mind. The company Natural Stacks has one called Brain Food. The company Newtopia has this entire big black box that shipped to your house based on a neurotransmitter quiz that you take on their website. But it's not as though our ancestors didn't have certain things that they would use with a mortar and pestle, or sip the oil or the extract of, or take certain things to improve cognition. We in a modern era of encapsulation technology and other ways to extract nutrients have access to even a lot more than I think humankind has ever had access to. And so yeah, there's an entire sector of compounds called nootropics, NOO tropics, nootropics, and that literally translates into mind director. And these are specific compounds that you can take: ginkgo biloba or bacopa monnieri, or lion's mane, like I mentioned, or alpha GPC, or any other number of things that I think go way beyond the old, like a cup of coffee and piece of nicotine gum to keep the brain humming along. So I would definitely look into the world of nootropics. And then smart drugs or plant medicines would also fit into the mix. On a very, very sleep deprived day or with excessive travel, I'll use something like modafinil or Provigil for wakefulness, an off-label narcoleptic drug. Another example would be microdosing with LSD or with psilocybin in very small doses, which can also really, really help out with neurogenesis and left-right hemispheric coordination, creative thinking patterns combined with analytical thinking patterns, etc. This morning, while I'm talking to you, I had a coffee, lion's mane, and something called Schizandra berry as my morning brew. And then I also took in my morning smoothie something called C60, which is a really potent antioxidant, which is also fantastic for mental function. And then in each nostril, I did a spray of an intranasal peptide called CMAX, which is very, very good for overall memory, verbal fluency, etc. And so that would have been like a typical stack that I do on an average day.
Now you rattled off a long list of things there. While we're at it, let me ask you, is there a resource that we can send people to, maybe on your website, et cetera, to get a little bit more depthful information on the subject matter of these different hacks for sleep?
Yeah. Oh, for sleep particularly?
Yeah, or just, I mean, you just named a whole bunch of things that you take.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I would say the most up-to-date article on my website would be the one called, it's called like Ben Greenfield's Age Reversal Strategy. I wrote it about 5 weeks ago. It's my most up-to-date list of things like exercises and supplements and things like that. And then if you were to go to my website and do the search for nootropics, NOOTROPICS, you'd come up with probably about a dozen different articles and podcasts that I've done about nootropics or so-called smart drugs. And then regarding sleep, I would say, not to shill my own stuff, but my book Boundless has about the most comprehensive referenced material I've ever produced on enhancing sleep. So that would be a good one for sleep.
It's interesting that you brought up the subject matter of sleep. I was going to actually go there as well, so we might as well now. I've been taking in a lot of content myself lately and listen to some of Rick Rubin's podcasts, certainly to Andrew Huberman, who I listen to quite often. Those two guys are huge proponents of that. Once you wake up, that initial wake up period of time, taking in some significant natural sunlight because of the way that it affects the brain function and resets our circadian rhythms, et cetera. You want to speak a little bit about that and the importance of getting some natural sunlight in the morning?
Yeah. The only time you wouldn't want to get that amount of natural sunlight is if you find yourself waking earlier than when you actually desire to wake, because there are specific things called zeitgers. I think the German translation for that is literally timekeepers. And zeitgers are things that you can do that would either shift your circadian rhythm forwards or shift your circadian rhythm backwards, or allow for better wakefulness, or like a hesitation or a slowing of the natural sleep drive that occurs. Light is one very potent zeitgeber. And because of that, if you get out of bed at, let's say, 5 a.m. and you flip on like your blue light producing office lights and take your phone out of night mode and turn on the lights in the house and open the refrigerator, it's almost like too big of a blast of light, and you're going to train your body to start waking earlier and earlier. And that's great if you actually do want to start, posting Instagram photos like the Navy SEALs do of you at the gym at 3:59 a.m. But if that's not your desire, then you wait to expose your body to all that light, sunlight, light from screens, light from overhead lighting, etc., until the time arrives when you actually do want to send your body a message that it's waking time, and preferably an hour after that time arrives. Like, even though I a lot of times will wake up at like 4:30 to work, for me, just based on family dinner times and stuff, I'd rather wake up at about 5. I wait until around 6 a.m. to start to really like take the brightener off of the screens, get sunlight, turn on the overhead lights in the office, etc. And up until that point, from the time I wake to the time I flip on all those lights, I'll wear blue light blocking glasses. If I'm traveling, I have a little cheapo like red light headlamp I'll use to get around the hotel room. I've got red lights installed in my master bedroom and bathroom so I can get ready for the day while I'm under something that more mimics like sunrise rather than bright natural sunlight. And then when evening rolls around or the sun sets in whatever area of the world that I happen to be in, I go back to that red light mode where I like put on the blue light blocking glasses and flip on the red lights and turn off the overhead lights and dim the screens, etc. So yeah, light is definitely a zeitgeber. The other two biggest ones, even though some people argue that temperature is, like sleeping in a cool environment, it's a little less powerful than the other two, which would be movement and food. So a lot of times breakfast skippers will not have great sleep parameters, even though there's some metabolic benefits of intermittent fasting. Breakfast is such a great circadian cue that, especially if you're traveling and you want to get adapted to whatever time zone you're in, have breakfast at the normal time in that time zone as soon as possible after you get there. So like if I fly into Tokyo for a business trip or whatever, and I get in at 2 a.m., I won't like stop off and grab a snack at the airport or whatever. I'll go to bed and wait until 8 or 9 a.m. to actually have my first meal to get my body adjusted to that time zone while avoiding food on the plane, for example, unless the food I eat on the plane is closer to something like 7 or 8 p.m. in Tokyo, which depending on the plane that I'm on would be maybe 2 or 3 hours into the plane ride, because food can be used as a really, really great circadian hack as well. Particularly if you have anywhere from 20 to 40 grams of protein with that first meal of the day, that can really help to stabilize the circadian rhythm. So if you have poor sleep, try not skipping breakfast and have more protein with breakfast. And then the last one is movement. Again, if you're exercising very early, heading to the gym really early underneath all those blue lights with the loud music, etc., and you also find yourself waking much earlier than you want to, it might benefit you to wait till later to go to the gym or shift your gym session to like the later afternoon or the early evening, because movement is such a great circadian cue. Similarly, because it heats the body up, in the same way that you should avoid a big, spicy, heavy meal 2 to 3 hours prior to bedtime, you should avoid a hard exercise session 2 to 3 hours prior to bedtime, because it can be sleep disruptive. So yeah, the best way to think about sleep and sleep optimization is in terms of those zeitgebers. Like, understand how light, how exercise or movement, and how food affects sleep to a certain deal temperature as well, and then adjust your lifestyle accordingly. For example, when you travel, to phase shift the circadian rhythm forwards or backwards, or when you're just in your normal time zone, to send your body the right signals at the right time for proper sleep patterns.
Excellent. So, but just touch on, if you would please, very briefly, the research behind looking into the sun or towards the sun in the morning and what that does to brain chemistry.
Yeah, you have something in your retina called in your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the SCN. And when light hits the retina, it serves as a signal to the SCN to do things like send a message to your hypothalamus to increase cortisol production, or send a message to your pineal gland to decrease melatonin production. And so essentially light is doing a very good job increasing the chemicals that would keep you awake while decreasing the chemicals that would drive sleepiness, for better or worse, right? That's great in the daytime, possibly not in the very early wee hours of the morning, as we were just talking about, but it's not so great, towards the evening when you're getting ready for bed. And so it basically just comes down to mostly melatonin and cortisol, some excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitter signaling, and the fact that light can ramp up or ramp down those signaling pathways. And it's also interesting because your skin is covered in photoreceptors as well. So even though I sleep with a sleeping mask on, I still have blackout shades in the bedroom. And this might sound kind of OCD. Like when I travel, I don't know about you, Tim, but sometimes you'll like turn off the lights in a hotel room. It'll be like a spaceship, like the TV's blinking and the phone's got the little thing going on. And, you know, there's some coffee maker with a blue light. So I actually travel with a little roll of electrical tape, and I'll like rip off a few pieces of electrical tape after I turn off the lights in the hotel room and put them over all the stuff that's still producing light. Because again, even if I'm not seeing the light with my eyes, I'm seeing it with my skin. And even that can disrupt sleep patterns, especially in a light sleeper.
Yeah, yeah, I've definitely found that I mean, I don't take the electrical tape with me, but I've definitely found that my sleep is significantly better the darker that I make the room. I mean, it's just a pretty simple formula. And like you said, there's so many people that, you know, fall asleep with the TV on and have all kinds of other things that are having an impact on them that they're not even aware of. Let's what are some healthy snacks? Like, let's get to something super practical here. Like, what are 5 to 10 things people should just be going out and buying? Like I tell people all the time when I'm coaching them, it's like, look, I mean, left to our own devices, you know, we're not, you know, that strong in our willpower. So in my mind, a part of eating healthy is shopping right and knowing your limitations, having the things in your desk drawer at the office and your refrigerator at the office that are only going to be supportive of a healthy lifestyle. Same thing with your house. Kind of my formula has been for a very long time that when I'm at home, which is also where I work, I eat healthy. And I only have healthy things in my house. Maybe the most unhealthy thing I have in my house right now is like popcorn. But other than that, like I don't have like cookies and shit like that. I mean, I've got dried fruit, I've got nuts, I've got fresh fruit, you know, that kind of stuff if I have a sweet craving. And then when I go out and am in, you know, Mexico with Ben Greenfield, I'll eat, you know, a coconut popsicle or have a gelato with him in the afternoon in Florence like we did this last July. But I mean, I cheat when I'm out. And most of the time I'm not out. So I know that I've got that kind of built into my system is that when I'm at home, I'm going to eat healthy. What are some healthy snacks that you suggest people have in their drawers?
Yeah, for sure. You keep making me sound like Satan with that ice cream and gelato and the tempting popsicle. It is kind of funny because, you asked this question, but like despite what you've witnessed when hanging out with me in foreign countries when I'm on vacation, rarely if ever snack when I'm actually at home. Yeah, if I'm out in the hot Mexican sun, I'll get a coconut popsicle or I'll have a gelato on a blazing day in Italy. But for the most part, when I'm at home, I actually don't snack. And if you would have asked that question to a lot of folks, there are certain things that if you did want to snack would be better to snack on, like things that don't spike the blood sugar, which we established earlier is a great way to kind of poop out your pancreas a little bit early. So this would be like seeds and nuts, but not the kind that you buy in the bag at the gas station. If you look at the label, are feather dusted with cane sugar and soaked in canola oil, right? Just like natural. Like there's one company called they're a macadamia company. They've been advertising on some podcasts recently. They even advertised on my podcast now, House of Macadamia. So they've got like macadamia nuts with different coatings on them that are healthy and little macadamia snacks and macadamia nut bars. I'm a big fan of Brazil nuts, raw almonds, roasted pumpkin seeds. Things like seeds and nuts are pretty glycemically stabilizing, especially if they don't have the M&Ms and the chocolate chips stirred in the same way that popcorn isn't that bad unless you're like my mom and you put butterscotch chips and M&Ms in your popcorn. But yeah, nuts and seeds are a good one. I'm a fan of a lot of these higher fat snacks like sliced avocado with a little bit of olive oil and sea salt, handful of olives, either with the avocados or with the nuts. I'm a fan of very, very pure, clean, dark chocolate, like 90 to 100% dark chocolate, just because it has a lot of, vasodilatory properties and blood flow enhancing properties. And then, there are a lot of bars out there that, even though I'm not a big fan of eating out of packages and, eating a lot of food that's processed, you want to look for bars with all clean ingredients like chia seeds, almonds, coconut flakes, macadamia nuts, etc. And so, if I were going to snack, I would basically be choosing the higher fat type of items that are more glycemically stabilizing. However, one of the reasons I rarely snack anymore is because of that whole concept of ketosis. that I talked with you about earlier, and the advent or availability now of the same type of ketone esters, like liquid drinkable ketones, that were formerly only available to like professional athletes like Tour de France cyclists, or used in the military for research for allowing soldiers to go for long periods of time without calorie intake. And so if I do know I got to go for a long period of time without eating, and there is a situation which I'll probably get hungry, I've got basically 4 things that I do. I'll drink some ketone esters, which are a liquid drinkable ketone that shifts your body into the same metabolic state as it would be if you'd fasted for 2 or 3 days as far as your ketone availability. And like, I'll have one of those before an airplane flight and just like not think about food at all for 6 to 8 hours. So ketones, liquid.
Does it wipe out your appetite?
Yeah. I mean, not as much as like Ozempic or one of these new weight loss peptides. I'm not a big fan of those because you can sometimes get some lean mass, muscle tissue loss. But yeah, you're not hungry like that. And it's not because you're nauseous. You're just like, they're just providing such a great stable source of fuel to your brain and your liver and your heart and your diaphragm that, it's extremely efficacious. So I'm a huge fan of the ketone esters. There are companies like HVMN that make one called Ketone IQ. There's the company Ketone Aid. They make another one called K1 and one called K4. So ketone esters would be the first. The second thing that I do are amino acids. I use essential amino acids because slow dosing essential amino acids throughout the day, not branch chain amino acids, which spike the blood glucose, but essential amino acids, which are taken into the muscle and used to help stabilize or build or maintain muscle. I'll do about a 5-gram scoop of amino acids powder, essential amino acids powder, either straight into my mouth or in water 4 to 5 times a day. So my amino acid levels are staying elevated, but there's barely any calories in amino acids. They're just muscle building blocks. So that's number 2. I'll use ketones, I'll use amino acids, and then the last 2 are anything sparkling. So I like this company Zevia. I got a whole garage full of Zevia, which is like stevia flavored soda in a lot of your favorite flavors like Dr. Pepper or root beer or Coke, but it's not sugar, it's stevia. And so they're pretty healthy. Or sparkling water. And sometimes I'll put a little bit of essential oil like peppermint, which is a natural appetite suppressant, into my sparkling water. And the reason that I do that is I find that the bubbles help to keep me a little bit full and keep me from snacking. So there's ketones, essential amino acids, sparkling water, sometimes with something added to it, or Zevia flavored soda or stevia flavored soda. And then the last one is some type of gum. There's another guy named Mark Bell. He has a product called fasting gum, which is gum that's dusted with just a little bit of caffeine and some natural appetite suppressants. There's another one from Greece called mastic gum. And then there's a company called Lucy that makes nicotine gum. And most of the time, I'm like chomping on a piece of that, sucking on some sparkling water, and then dosing occasionally with the ketone esters and the amino acids. And that's kind of like, that's the more advanced guide to healthy snacking that a lot of people aren't talking about. But that's kind of the route I go because it allows me to not have to stop and think about eating, not have to eat in a stress state like when I'm working, which can limit nutrient uptake, and also just not really have to fuss around with looking at a bunch of labels and figuring what has canola oil in it. I just have these standby snacks. Most of those are portable, or you can find them at grocery stores like sparkling water or gum, just by everywhere you go. And then I'll just travel with some essential amino acids and ketones. And that's how I do it.
You keep mentioning canola oil. So what are the preferred oils? Olive, avocado?
Yeah, heat stable oil that hasn't been exposed to a lot of processing chemicals or high pressures or rancidity or high amounts of temperature. My top ones would be extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil. Macadamia oil is fantastic for heat stability. I use a little bit of butter, a little bit of ghee, a little bit of beef tallow. And even though there are, a few other fats and oils out there, those would be the main ones that are in my pantry.
What are the common denominators of top originators in the mortgage business? They're well scripted. They have a system for marketing themselves that generates leads. They manage an effective database and they have strong referral partner relationships. The other common denominator of many great originators is that they have a business and life plan, a roadmap, a guide for them to achieve success, and they have an ally, a coach, who assists them in the successful implementation of that plan. Performance Experts Performance Accelerator private one-on-one 1-year coaching program is now accepting applications. This is my company, and these are my certified coaches that specialize in the mortgage business. Go to www.mortgagecoachingnow.com and click on Get a Coach, or go to the show notes and click on the link that's provided in this episode. Now let's get back to the show. As we're winding this down, I want to hit you with one question away from the subject matter of health and wellness, although I don't believe that ultimately anything is. I think all of our health and wellness are dictated by a variety of things, not just food, not just exercise, but our emotional states, our spiritual connection, our community, our connection with other human beings, etc. So in a conversation that we once had, you made a statement that I thought was really beautiful and profound that I'd like you to elaborate on in closing, which is you said I realized that the things that made me weird when I was a kid are the things that make me special as an adult. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think even though there's actually a verse in the Bible where Apostle Paul says that, when he became a man, he put away childish things and, no longer thought or spoke or reasoned like a child. That's true when it comes to, I guess, perhaps telling a constant stream of fart jokes or, being obsessed with how often you might get a popsicle. But when it comes to childhood, you also have to realize that you're wired up to be passionate about, to enjoy, and even to be good at certain activities. Some of those might even make you stand out or be unique or be weird or be, even bullied or isolated as a child. But you should pay attention to those clues. I tell a lot of people who are looking to find their purpose in life, think about what it is that makes time go by fast for you. Think about what it is that you do even if you weren't getting paid. And think about those things that you were really good at when you were a kid, because a lot of times they give a clue to you about what it is you're passionate about now. Or as author Mark Manson says, do things that make you forget to eat and poop. And that would be another example of a passion building exercise. But, I have a poster on my wall. I can actually see it from here. And I just sat down and wrote about who I was as a child to remind me about the things that I'm naturally good at now, and to not be ashamed of those, but to own those and to use them to bless others and to help the world. That poster says he has very high interpersonal and musical intelligence and a vivid creative imagination, hopelessly romantic and falls in love with both people and things very easily, highly responsible, reads people very well and likes to study them, loves the hell out of stories and books, sees the world as a book that's meant to be read chapter by chapter, and likes to tackle tasks with that same approach, digests and learns new information at extremely rapid pace, excellent storyteller for both entertainment and education, judgmental editor with a sharp eye for errors or imperfections, has clearly defined boundaries and rules, but generally shuns authority, takes great pride in personal appearance, prefers privacy but not solitude, cares deeply about the health of others, disciplined and very competitive with self, and also quite self-critical, a unique combination of physical culture and intellectualism, loves God, loves family, and digs all things spiritual. And so that's hanging on my wall, just like kind of remind me about who I was when I was a kid. But yeah, I think everybody at some point should engage in some type of exercise in which they're interviewing their parents or perhaps their older or younger siblings about who they were as a kid, thinking back to the things they were naturally good at and enjoy doing. And yeah, you will still need a filter through which to pass those exercises and ask yourself what was based on immaturity and lack of knowledge or wisdom or discernment, and which were done because you were naturally really, really good at those things. Like maybe you just picked up math super fast, or you could read a book a day, or, you could just sing perfectly, pitch perfect. And now maybe you don't do anything that involves building or mathematician or arithmetic or figuring numbers. And maybe you don't read anything except for work. And maybe you're just not immersed in instrumentation or music or singing at all. Well, that means that you're gradually producing, what Gabor Mate would call, trauma, disconnection from true self, these tiny wounds that build up over the course of a lifetime because you're no longer connected to the true authentic self that you weren't ashamed of being as a child. And so that's why I think it's important, even though if you had some weird things that you did when you were a kid, to think back and to connect to those things that would allow you to love God and love other people as much as possible now that you're an adult.
So glad I asked that question. So glad you brought up Dr. Gabor Mate. I'm a huge fan of his as well. And isn't it interesting? I mean, what struck me when I was listening to you read what you have on the wall was how beautiful it is that you're able to look into the mirror and see yourself and see all of the things about yourself that make you unique and beautiful. Most human beings don't go through any kind of a process or an exercise like that, and it's also woefully uncomfortable for them to do so. And to your point of Gabor and trauma, I mean, trauma is something that we all experience at a young age in various forms, and it's totally relative to the individual and unique to the individual. But what can perpetuate the trauma is an abandonment of self. And what I really heard in you reading those things was not an abandonment of self, but quite the opposite, a love of self, an acknowledgement of self. And that is probably the most healing thing that any of us can do, is rather than shun and or ignore the things that quote unquote made us weird when we were younger, is to look inwardly and acknowledge them and see the beauty in each of those individual things that we possess, and to honor them on a consistent basis by bringing them out more, right? By not tucking them away and hiding them in an embarrassed state, by bringing them out and honoring them and honoring the beauty of who we are as individuals. So I'm so glad I asked you that question. I knew you were the right man to answer it, and I really loved your answer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you've so beautifully outlined, child peering and looking in the rearview mirror can serve you well. And so can looking ahead. That's something I learned from you in San Miguel de Allende, is the idea of writing your own obituary, planning your own funeral, like thinking ahead to that grave moment and what you will or will not be remembered for, and whether you will have any regrets about the life that you've lived, or think of, Bonnie Rarie's 5 Regrets of the Dying. Like, I wish I'd chosen to be happy. I wish I'd worked less. I wish I'd stayed in touch with old friends. I wish I'd showed my emotions more. And I wish, related to what we're talking about right now, I'd been my true authentic self rather than who I think the world wants me to be. And something that I'll show you, and I probably got to wrap up here pretty soon myself, is I also went to that silly little age app and I aged myself. And this is also hanging on my wall. Like, this is the old me, right? With the beard and the wrinkles and everything. And I keep this in my office just to remind myself of my own mortality and the fact that I can't just, dick around on Instagram feeds and Facebook all day and, be neglecting my true purpose. And sometimes it's easy to forget that we're getting older. We're not going to be around forever. And I kind of like that idea of future thinking to your own mortality as well. And gosh, you did such a good job teaching that concept in Mexico. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And it was very much an honor to have you there and to share that experience with you, and also to share the experience of going to the paleo together. That was quite a memorable evening.
I also saw my own death at the paleo, but in a different way.
Well, Ben, I want people to go to you. You have several books that you've read, or you've written, I should say. You have a podcast. You have an epic website. Where do you want to send people to?
Oh, just my website's fine. It's bengreenfieldlife.com, and you can find my podcast and my books wherever you find podcasts and books.
Right on, man. Ben, thanks so much. You've been on the treadmill for about an hour and 10 minutes now. So I hope that didn't get your heart rate up too high. We wouldn't want to do any damage to the arteries. And
that would be paradoxical.
Yeah, please say hi to Jessa and the kids too.
I will. Well, thanks so much, Tim. I'm honored that you had me on. Thanks for the interview.
Thanks, buddy.
All right, later.
Bye-bye.